Hello, welcome to another Purple Insider Extra. Matthew Coller along with Sam Ekstrom here. And Sam, lots going on in Minnesota Vikings land. Let's start off with the official news that Irv Smith Jr. is going to be out 4 to 5 months after having surgery on his meniscus. And I know that we discussed it a little bit before, but now we know for sure that he is out long term. That means Tyler Conklin and the Vikings traded for Chris Herndon from the New York Jets. And I know that it was presented on Twitter when the news broke as a high ceiling type of signing. I look at it much more of just trying to plug a hole with a person who's played in the NFL before, but Irv Smith's shoes are very difficult to fill.
Yeah, when you try to fill a starting role at this stage of the game, you're not going to get perfection. Like when the Vikings got Sam Bradford a few years ago, you weren't going to get Patrick Mahomes, but you did the best you could. And this is a case of a player that for 1 year in a pretty dysfunctional place was pretty good. He had 500 yards and 4 touchdowns as a rookie. Then he got hurt, missed some games due to suspension, had a really bad 2019, barely played. And then 2020, the Jets were just completely dysfunctional, and they had a lame duck coach and a struggling quarterback. So I think it's a good move. I mean, the expense is low. It's $2 million. You get in, I'd say a tight end 2 caliber player who can pair with Conklin. You probably lose your high ceiling that you had with Irv Smith, but I like the move. I like that the Vikings, took matters into their own hands before they even knew the severity of the injury. And they added Ben Ellefson today as well, who had 1 catch for Jacksonville last year. So they are trying to bolster that position and, just trying to get 75% of what they were going to have, they think, with Irv Smith.
The way that I look at it is kind of the best you could do if someone like Dallas Goedert was not unavailable, who the Vikings reportedly looked into, but he is a key player for the Philadelphia Eagles, and so it probably would have cost them a lot. And we would have been looking at a Yannick Ngakoue type of trade again, and I think maybe they did not want to recreate that. So now they're in a position where Mike Zimmer says they have to turn to more 3 wide receiver, especially in some key spots. D.D. Westbrook is back at practice. That Kirk Cousins talked about him getting into some drills, but we're not sure of the expectation for week 1. So this is something that we're going to be watching for what their adjustments are when they go on to play Cincinnati. All right, Everson Griffen was cut, but I want to use the finger quotes here for cut because we believe, and this has not happened yet as we're recording this, that Everson Griffen will be back on this football team. And even Mike Zimmer was coy when we spoke with him today about, well, we're not totally set with the current roster, so it's fluid, he said several times. And I think that means Everson Griffen will indeed be coming back. So that was the biggest sort of surprise of Cutdown Day. Sam, were there any other surprises that actually will impact the season? Because I don't believe the Everson Griffen one will.
Yeah, the 3-week IR has just changed the way that rosters are constructed so drastically that I don't know if I can believe anything as final at this point. Like some of the young players that snuck through, like Jalen Holmes and James Lynch and Dan Chisna, I don't know if they're going to hang on. Like I don't know how many of these guys are going to go to IR. Could be up to 5. I mean, Josh Metellus could go IR, Kene Nwangwu, Christian Darrisaw, Anthony Barr. Like we have no idea how that's going to play out, so it's hard to really know what is true and what's not. But the Vikings did sort of utilize some of those non-guaranteed veteran contracts to their advantage. They cut Dakota Dozier, knowing that they can bring him back if they need guard depth. They cut Amir Abdullah, knowing that they could probably bring him back as well. Same thing with Griffen, and potentially the same thing with their long snapper, Andrew DePaula. I mean, they can bring these guys back on the same deals, sort of a handshake agreement. And once they transfer players to that 3-week IR, which is being used, I think, much more liberally than the PUP list, then they can, reinstate those players. So it's really hard to say what's real, Coller. Right. I mean, it's a weird deal. I mean, I was shocked that Dan Gisena made this roster again, but I don't know if that's permanent. I think that's a bit too much of a niche for a player that you're gonna, invest in for 2 years, who's not going to be a real wide receiver for you. And I was surprised at Jalen Holmes, but like we said, that those could be gone pretty quickly.
Yeah, and one of the reasons they could be gone or there could be changes is because of the backup quarterback situation. And that is something that we're also watching and how the Vikings are going to handle this. Now, there were some reports that they would cut Jake Browning and then bring him back. So there were 2 ways that they could handle it if they wanted to keep Jake Browning around. One was to just leave him on the 53. The other was to put him on the practice squad. And then if they decided on having Browning and Mond as their backup quarterbacks, they could elevate Jake Browning if Kirk Cousins was missing for some reason. But I think a better option, Sam, is to just find a veteran. And just before we turned on the camera here, Sean Mannion was released by the Seattle Seahawks. That would make a lot of sense if they were to bring back Sean Mannion. But I think they're in a position where they absolutely have to have someone who could fill in for 2 games, win one of those 2 games. If you remember a few years ago, Matt Moore came in for Patrick Mahomes. He won a key game against the Vikings. They got a number 2 seed and a first-round bye because of that win. I mean, that could be the difference between making the playoffs and not. Clearly, they don't trust Kellen Mond to be the backup at this point, so I think they will look for a veteran backup quarterback.
Yeah, there's nothing I've seen from Browning to suggest that he's going to either come into a game midway or even, go into the week as the starter and be able to perform against starting real defenses. We saw him struggle in 3 straight preseason games, mostly against backups. I'm not sure that it would be any prettier in the regular season. So you look at the waiver wire, and I know, some teams might want to re-sign these guys, but Nate Sudfeld was on the market last night. Nick Mullins, you just mentioned Sean Mannion. Trevor Siemian got released. Hey, Cam Newton's out there too. Like there's a lot of names out there, and I think this team could probably do their vetting and bring someone in for a veteran's minimum and give themselves a little bit better of a shot. I don't believe that Kellen Mond is the true number 2 backup, even though he played better in the 3rd preseason game. This team needs a little more stability than that.
Okay, do you think it was a good idea, Sam, to keep Greg Joseph as the kicker? Because all really off-season long, we've thought, I'm not sure that Greg Joseph will win this job, and then he was not so good during preseason and training camp that we said, okay, lock, dead, set. But now that he's made the initial 53, we haven't seen them make another move for a kicker. It looks like he's the guy. Again, that could all change by the time you're watching the video, but if he is the guy, is that a good idea to stick with Greg Joseph as opposed to looking elsewhere?
I don't know if it's a good idea because I saw like a bunch of kickers cut yesterday. I mean, some decent legs too. And obviously they were cut for a reason. They were cut ostensibly because they were struggling. But Pinheiro, Sly, a couple guys from the Lions, and like some guys that have kicked at a high level before. And the Vikings have a history of trying out kickers and then knowing who they want and then signing them the first time their kicker kind of shows that he's losing it. Maybe that's what they're going to do here and figure out kind of who their next in line is and then give Greg Joseph the first couple weeks. Can he make all of his kicks? He's missed 1 in each of his last 2 games. That's a disturbing trend. I thought that this would actually be a good opportunity to go get someone else, so I am marginally surprised that they stuck with him.
I am too, that there was never any type of actual competition here at any point. Mm-hmm. I would have thought that there would have been some competition other than very briefly Riley Patterson. I think we saw him kick maybe twice in all of training camp, and then he was cut with an injury, and they didn't bring anybody else in. So that surprised me that they've just sort of left it to Greg Joseph. But I would say this, that if anybody out there knows how to predict kickers, the NFL would love to pay you a lot of money to predict that, because even the best kickers have their ups and downs. And so Greg Joseph has kicked in the league before, only 1 year, but he was fairly successful. And hey, when they picked up Kai Forbath, who turned out to be a good kicker for them, he was a relative journeyman, sort of, it bounced around kind of thing, and then he hit one of their biggest field goals that they've had really in team history in the playoffs in the Minneapolis Miracle game. So you just don't know, and they'll have to hope that Greg Joseph is the guy. So plenty more to come here from TCO Performance Center as we march to week 1, and next week it will be on to Cincinnati. So keep an eye out at purpleinsider.substack.com for our written analysis of all these things going on, and listen to the Purple Insider podcast. We'll catch you next time.
Nice Greyhound sweater.
Adopt Greyhounds.